It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to begin my discussion at a much more abstract level and then hopefully come down to more the nitty-gritty. The abstract level is to ask the question, what have we learned from what might be viewed as a major natural experiment? The pandemic has affected countries all over the world. Some countries have done better in controlling the disease and better in controlling the economic aftermath. And we all know some of the countries that have done really well, New Zealand, South Korea, Germany. We know some of the countries that have done very badly, Brazil, India, and the United States. So the question is, as we look at those successes and failures, what insights does it give us for a broader assessment of the nature of the economy and the nature of society? But of course, before we can answer that question, we have to ask, how do we compare, how do we evaluate success? And that, of course, was the subject of the International Commission that I chaired on the measurement of economic performance and social progress. And we emphasized the relevant performance variable was not just GDP, but included things like inequality, insecurity. Now we certainly would emphasize resilience, sustainability, and there are enormous variations in these variables. How the proofs of society are shared, the disparities in that have been illustrated and exacerbated by the pandemic. This has not been an equal opportunity virus. It goes after people with more health conditions. And in societies like the United States, where there are poor health conditions because they don't recognize the right of access to health care, there's ample opportunity for them to prey on a lot of people. It's also exposed the deficiencies in systems of social protection. Why is that relevant? Well, if you don't have paid sick leave, and the United States is the only advanced country that doesn't provide paid sick leave, you go to work if you possibly can, especially when about half your population is so poor that they have to live paycheck to paycheck. And of course, if they go to work when they're sick, it helps spread the disease. So systems of social protection are designed to help the most vulnerable, but they, in times of a pandemic, also serve to protect our society. Resilience, I mentioned that just a minute ago. We discovered that our private sector wasn't able to even produce simple products like masks or protective gear, let alone complicated products like tests or ventilators. So the pandemic has really exposed, and you might say exacerbated, lots of the problems in our society. Now, a year before the crisis, I wrote a book called People, Power, and Profits, asking the broader question, what explains the wealth of nations, why some countries are wealthier than others, and what explains the income disparities within countries. And there were four themes that I raised there, and I think it turned out that those were very insightful in terms of understanding the different responses to the pandemic. The first, and these are all almost cliches, but they turn out to be really important. The importance of science. It's the reason why standards of living today are so much higher than they were 250 years ago. For centuries before that, before the Enlightenment, standards of living have remained constant, hadn't changed at all, and then suddenly they soared. And why was that? It was partly the importance of science. And of course, in the midst of the pandemic, we are again seeing the importance of science. Secondly, the importance of social organization, systems of governance, checks and balances, rule of law. And again, societies where there are stronger institutions, a key part of social organizations, institutions that function, have done better. The third is the importance of systems of discovering, assessing, verifying the truth. It's obviously at the center of science, but it's also necessary for the functioning of social organization. And one of the problems we've seen very critically in this crisis is the spread of mis and disinformation about the disease, about the virus, about vaccines, about therapeutics. And obviously, if you have massive disinformation going on, it's very hard to respond effectively to the virus. And finally, the importance of inequality. It undermines the ability of societies to function well, and much of the inequality is related to exploitation. Historically, there have been two views about the sources of inequality. One is that it's related to just deserts. It's the view that's embodied in the marginal productivity theory, often associated with neoliberalism. And the other is that a lot of it is due with the exploitation. And exploitation is to do with market power, rent seeking. There is a growing consensus that the second view is responsible for a lot of the inequality in our society. And that means we should look to what gives rise, there's a disparity between what gives rise to the wealth of individuals and what gives rise to the wealth of nations. Individuals can get wealthy by taking resources away from others in an exploitive way through exercise of market power. That's very different from the creation of wealth. And as we look at this crisis, it has exposed some of the, you might say, inequities in our society. Individuals who were the frontline workers turn out to be the lowest paid workers. They are the most exposed. They are the suffering the most. And yet we are very dependent on these workers for the goods and services that we need to survive. So the conclusion of that book was that we need a new social contract with greater emphasis on the role of the state, a better balance between markets, states, and civil society. A modern urban knowledge-based society is based on knowledge, which is a public good. Externalities are pervasive, like climate change. And of course, a pandemic is a quintessential illustration of an externality. So the bottom line is that the kinds of themes that have been the basis of understanding what is the source of the wealth of nations and the difference between the wealth of nations and the wealth of individuals has become very evident in the crisis. One of the implications of this disparity that I just emphasized is that you can get a more equal society at the same time that you get a more productive society. The view that there's a big trade-off that, say, Arthur Oken, who was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Johnson, talked about, that view is no longer dominant. And the view today is that societies with more equality can actually perform better. And I think that has been highlighted by what has happened in the midst of the crisis. So I want to now turn a little bit to how this has played out in the crisis, focusing on one particular aspect of the role of government. In the midst of a crisis, we always turn to government. And government plays an essential role in managing risk. And there's a theoretical reason for this. Risk markets are deficient. That was one of the insights of Arrow and DeBrugge, both of whom got the Nobel Prize. But at a more popular level, Michael Lewis wrote a very influential book called The Fifth Risk before the pandemic. And he emphasized the role of the state in risk management and how over the last 40 years, the denigration of the role of government, the undermining of social cohesion and solidarity, the undermining of trust, undermining of the role of science, has all left us in a position of less capability of addressing the risks that we face. It was interesting, he addressed a whole set of risks. One of them was not pandemics, but that, of course, is the risk that we see. And not a surprise that the United States did not perform well. There was a disbanding of the White House office in response to the pandemic that had been created by Obama. The threat of pandemics was evident with SARS, MERS, Ebola, and White House office as part of the National Security Council was created because it is a security risk, and that was disbanded. But even more to the point, the institution that was designed to respond to an infectious disease, the Centers for Disease Control, that was defunded. And without funds, the adequate funding, it was unable to develop the tests and respond in the way that we needed. We've seen that countries like New Zealand, where there are both strong institutions, a high level of solidarity, and a high level of trust, did much better than countries like the United States, countries led by demagogues like Brazil, where the basis of political strategy was to divide the society, to attack the media, to attack the truth institutions, to undermine the universities and the research institutions. And unfortunately, all this has had an enormous toll on these societies. So as economists, we often talk about institutions like good central banks. What I wanted to do in highlighting these first set of remarks is to say, actually, that's part of a broader agenda of trust, solidarity, good institutions, including science institutions, knowledge-based institutions, and that is something that the pandemic has exposed the huge division across the world, where some societies have done much better in this broad array of institutions, a broad array of characteristics that make for a well-performing society, a well-performing economy. Well, I don't want to, there's an awful lot more I can say about this, but let me move on to the economic aftermath. And what we have again seen is a very broad range of consequences. The United States spent more than any other country, but it was a bazooka. It was a fire hose. It was not very well targeted. And you have to understand that in the context of the discussion in the United States, where the president's solution, and to a large extent the Republican Party's solution, to any problem is a tax cut for the rich. And in this particular case, it was a payroll tax cut. So it was a little bit different, but the payroll tax cut doesn't help the unemployed, doesn't help the massive problem in our society. So the problem was that one had to have a compromise between the broad agenda that one party wanted and the peculiar views of the other party. What is very clear and should inform policy did inform policy then and should inform policy going forward is that there are large hysteresis effects. When a company goes bankrupt, it doesn't go unbankrupt when the economy recovers. We know that economic damage in terms of not only bankruptcy, but the evisceration of balance sheets of households and corporations takes a long time to repair. The deeper that evisceration of those balance sheets are, the longer and harder it is. The more bankruptcies, the longer and harder it is to recover. So not only is the damage now greater, the likelihood of a longer recovery, of a slower recovery, is also there. It's been emphasized already that this is an issue not just of liquidity, but solvency. When you have a 2-week interruption, it's a problem with liquidity, or a 4-week. And remember, when the pandemic started and there were the shutdowns, a lot of people thought that was going to be just a short interruption. And many of the policies that were adopted in February and March in this early spring were predicated on a V-shaped quick recovery. And that's why liquidity could be an important part of that recovery. Well, we're in October now. 6 months. In the United States, our unemployment insurance programs are designed to last 6 months. So we've gone from just a liquidity crisis to one of potential solvency. And so the instruments that are likely to be effective in a liquidity crisis, totally different as you go into this solvency issue. Now, one of the important aspects in any economy is the assistance has to be comprehensive. And there are large macroeconomic externalities. That is to say, weaknesses in any significant sector of the economy make it hard for other sectors of the economy to recover. The policy response in many countries, certainly in the United States, early on was dictated by the strength of the lobbyists, not the depth of the downturn. So among the sectors that are devastated are the state and local governments. And they represent 10% of public spending. I mean, 30% of public spending, a third of public spending, about 10% of GDP or more. You cannot have a strong recovery without a recovery of the state and local government, but state and local governments' revenues are plummeting, and they have balanced budget frameworks. So there's an automatic destabilizer built into the American economy. And we're already seeing that effect. The largest increase in unemployment is among state and government workers. A second aspect where Europe did a lot better than the United States was it was important for a quick recovery to keep workers attached to their firm. Especially important in the United States where workers get health care through employer-provided health insurance. But the United States didn't design a good program. There were good programs designed in Denmark and New Zealand. I had urged the U.S. Congress to adopt those. They decided not to because of the problems with mainly the Republicans. And the result of that is the United States unemployment rate has increased very large fractions, particularly lower income families have one or more members of their family out of a job. And the stress has been horrific, and especially since the extended unemployment program has terminated and the president refuses to extend that program in a meaningful way. There was a little discussion about whether that was going to discourage people from working. Evidence is overwhelming that it has not done so. That was just a misguided argument. The important thing that was mentioned in previous talk is the response to this great uncertainty of the crisis and the uncertainty of the economic response is precautionary behavior. Precautionary behavior on the part of firms, meaning that they're not going to be investing. Precautionary behavior on the part of households, which means that those who aren't living paycheck to paycheck are saving. Savings rate in the United States in the second quarter reached 25%. And this in a country where the normal savings rate is 2, 3, 4, 5%. So that means that there is a really dampened aggregate demand, and that means difficult to have a strong recovery. So two important aspects of any recovery package it has to be comprehensive, including our universities, our state and local governments, our research institutions, and secondly, it has to respond to the uncertainty, and for instance, by issuing pandemic contingent bonds, loans, where the repayment of the loan is contingent on the state of the economy and the state of the pandemic itself. Or another proposal that some countries have used is time-dated vouchers to encourage consumption of certain commodities where there's excessive fear that is dampening demand. So all of these are essential parts of the response. But the final part, which one sees in Europe, but unfortunately has not seen in the United States, is, but I think we'll see beginning next year, is the fact that never before has citizens supported the economy to the extent that it has. 15% of GDP in the United States, 750 billion euro recovery fund in Europe. And that means citizens have the right to demand that the recovery accords to their view of what the economy, society should look like. It's important to build back better. The deficiencies I mentioned in the beginning in January 2020, we don't want to go back to where we were. We want to build back a greener economy, a more equal economy, a more resilient economy, a more knowledge-based economy. And therefore, the funds for recovery have to serve dual, triple purpose. That is to say, they not only have to generate a recovery, they also have to transform, be part of the structural transformation of the economy in the ways I just described. Some of the research that I've done with my colleagues at Oxford, Cameron Hepburn, Nick Stern, and some of our associates, show that that kind of spending that is greener, for instance, can be timely, labor-intensive, big bang for the buck. And so that one can implement pandemic recovery in a way that restructures our economy. This is an opportunity. Never before would we have been able to marshal the level of support for funding that we have now marshaled. And let's make sure we use it well. The final question that obviously a lot of people are talking about is how worried should we be about too much spending? How worried should we be about inflation? In my mind, that's a problem sometime in the future. Right now, there's no inflationary pressures. The real risk, as I said before, is the hysteresis effects. If we don't spend enough, there'll be long-term damage. If inflationary pressures show up, we have the tools to deal with it. We have both fiscal and monetary tools. Monetary policy is much more effective in taking liquidity, excess liquidity out of the system, constraining the economy than it is stimulating the economy. And we have many fiscal tools, environmental taxes, wealth taxes, And especially in the United States, where we have a regressive tax system, opportunities to create a fair tax system would generate trillions of dollars over 10 years. So in my mind, we know that we have the tools to contain inflation should it appear, but that is not a question that we are likely to confront for several years into the future. Thank you.